let me ask you about Syria.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. This week we've seen these extraordinary images from Syria, children dying in a gas attack. And your husband had said that his worst foreign policy mistake as president was not acting more in Rwanda. In his defense, he only had 100 days. We've had a half dozen years in Syria as 300,000 people have been killed. Was that President Obama's worst foreign policy mistake? And I know that you were an advocate with Dave Petraeus of being more aggressive, but in retrospect, do you think that for you also, that was maybe your gravest foreign policy mistake as Secretary of State?
Well, you're right. When I was Secretary of State, I teamed up with Dave Petraeus, then Director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, then Secretary of Defense, to present a plan for us to move more aggressively to support protesters, to try to provide some backup in what was, I thought, likely to turn out to be a very one-sided battle. This was before ISIS really came to public awareness with their plan for a caliphate, and they're setting up headquarters in Raqqa. And I believed then, I've said this repeatedly, that I thought we should have done more at that point. Now, I'm the first to say that these are not easy decisions. That's why you want to get the best information you can from the best advisors you can, and to really drill down into this, whatever the situation is. I then, I left the government, and I then did promote a no-fly zone. And I still believe we should have done a no-fly zone. I think we should have been more willing to confront Assad, because remember, the Russians didn't get in at first, and the Iranian help was pretty much on the ground with the so-called Revolutionary Guard, Quds Force, and they were enlisting Hezbollah units to fight on the ground because there was a real fight going on. But Assad had an air force, and that air force is the cause of most of the civilian deaths, as we have seen over the years and as we saw again in the last few days. And I really believe that we should have, and still should, take out his airfields and prevent him from being able to use them to bomb innocent people and drop sarin gas on them. So, I wish, obviously, I wish that the international community writ large had been able to rein this in. I spent a lot of time with the Russians, with the Arab states, the Gulf states, and I actually had worked out an agreement for a transition in June of 2012 in Geneva, and we had hammered it out all day long. The Russian foreign minister, Lavrov, actually agreed to it, and it was calling for a technocratic government and, in effect, for the easing out of Assad. And I know that he left our meeting. I know he went to his embassy. I know that he asked, for guidance, and he came back and agreed. So it lasted about 24 hours because basically Assad said, I'm not going anywhere. And part of the reason Assad has been so dug in is because some of you who follow Syria know Syrian history. His father destroyed a city that was a hotbed of opposition to his rule. And I mean, literally massacred more than 10,000 people and almost seeded the ground so that nothing would ever grow there again. Very dramatic, but that was the impact it was meant to have. And so the people around Assad, who was never the person that was expected to succeed his father. That was an older brother who, was viewed as a much tougher character. Bashar was off in London practicing ophthalmology, and so his brother gets killed in a car wreck. He gets summoned home, and he basically is given the responsibility of becoming the dictator of Syria. So, why do I tell you all this? Because it matters if you know a little bit more about what is going on in the minds of those who are your adversaries. He is absolutely a prisoner of his family's expectations, his dead father's looming presence, and his delusion that I believe he now probably could pass a lie detector about, that everybody who opposes him is a terrorist. That's how Putin thinks, and Putin has basically, weighed in, particularly with air power, to support this fight to the death policy that Assad has. And I think that we've got to try to change the dynamic. And all through the campaign, I would say I'm for a no-fly zone. And immediately, whether it was in the primary or in the general election, I'd be asked, well, no, aren't you afraid of the Russians? It's time the Russians were afraid of us, because we were going to stand up for the rights, the human rights, the dignity, and the future of the Syrian people. And I actually had a lot of confidence that I could say to Putin and his team, look, you're either with us or against us on this no-fly zone. Here's what we're going to do. We don't want any confrontation with you, but we cannot let this massacre continue and the consequences that are affecting the entire region. So I feel pretty strongly about where we are now and what happened in these last days with a neurotoxin, probably sarin gas, is just... Let me say one more thing about this, because there will be people who say, well, it's not our fight. We don't care. What difference does it make? We're not involved. First of all, we are in an interconnected, interdependent world, unlike any we've been in history before, because of mobility, because of communications. And so what happens in other places can very much have an impact on you. But the world took a position. The world took a position after the First World War, whose 100th anniversary of starting we will be celebrating, or commemorating, not celebrating. And we took a stand against the use of chemical weapons. We have a whole unit attached to the United Nations that is devoted to trying to prevent chemical weapons from falling into the wrong hands, from being used. It is important that we take a strong stand against chemical weapons, and we thought, with the deal that the Obama administration negotiated, that we'd gotten rid of, their stocks, but who knows whether they'd hidden some or whether they bought more. We don't know. We just know the impact. And so it is in our interest. We've got to start, once again, recognizing norms of behavior in our own country and globally are just as important to keeping peace and preventing atrocities as any law that is written down. People have to know that they will be held accountable as war criminals, as committing crimes against humanity, if they engage in these kinds of aggressive, violent